providing in our constituencies, so that we can ultimately embrace the foundation itself in terms of the first early years of one's life, and how these affect the services that we do provide to our constituents. I will go on, Jennifer, and also just perhaps speak to the objectives themselves, to say that, as indicated, this training seeks to increase our knowledge and skills, particularly around understanding the importance of the early years in achieving sustainable development. Secondly, increasing knowledge and skills in terms of nurturing care framework. I'm asked to start the video. Okay. Yes, so I was saying that also increase knowledge and skills in terms of nurturing the care framework and accompanying guidelines, as well as increasing knowledge and skills in terms of the global and regional status of children and how these, in terms of ECD, are trending, as well as understanding the role of child rights governance, particularly when we are speaking about the promotion of holistic development for young children. Secondly, this training is going to help us to facilitate cross-country sharing of experiences and knowledge. You would see that we are in SADC, but even as we are, there are differences in terms of the different aspects that we implement, and we hope that today will facilitate for us to be able to share those experiences, to share the knowledge. Lastly, we want to ensure that we can build consensus around key aspects of what does matter in terms of Africa and ECD. We'll be able to then develop a position paper that would facilitate for us to engage with the different structures at AU level as we come as civil society organizations in the African continent. So basically, that's what we want to achieve with this training, Jennifer. And we hope that as we go through the various presentations and themes around these issues, that these objectives will be met, and that at the end of the day, we can go back to these objectives and check whether or not we have been able to meet the objectives as we set them for ourselves. Once again, thank you very much for being part of the training, and we hope to be here until 1 o'clock. And we hope that you can feel free to participate. This is a very critical discussion we are having, and would really, really appreciate it if it becomes interactive, particularly at the Q&A session. So do write down your comments, your questions, so that at the right session, when we start to engage with each other, we can have these properly documented, and we can engage as such. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Felicitas. So next up is, we have a short video. Probably those ones who joined in a bit early, you saw a part of the video. So I'm going to ask Dedan, my wingman, to play the video. And this video will be the basis of our discussion for the next few days. Dedan? Thank you so much, Dedan. So I'm going to hand over this meeting to Alicia to take up us to the next session. Alicia.
Thank you, Jennifer. Greetings and good morning to everyone. My name is Alicia Lutomia. I'm the Programs and Administration Officer at the Africa Early Childhood Network. And according to our program, we have next Ms. Maniza Ntekim from UNICEF SRO who will be presenting. Ms. Maniza, kindly.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I don't know should I share my screen or does somebody have my presentation there?
I think you should share your screen, Maniza,
Okay.
so that you can be able to space yourself.
Oh, it says the host has disabled the participant
Go
share.
ahead. I've enabled it for you.
Oh, all right, then let me try again. Aha, there we go. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes,
we can.
Okay, great. Okay, oops, I don't want you to see the end. Close your eyes. Let me start. There we go. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm so grateful to be able to join you today. Let me put my video on as well for this discussion and for this training session on early childhood development. And I'm pleased we start with Southern Africa. My mother was from South Africa, so I feel like I'm speaking to my family here. I will tell you, my father is from Nigeria, so I'm going to say the same thing when I talk to West Africa. And of course, because I live here in Nairobi, I'm going to say the same thing when I talk to East Africa. But in general, I'm really pleased to be here with everybody. And I really want to thank the CSO Forum and to thank our great partners at the African Early Childhood Development Network for giving me the opportunity to share some thoughts with you today. So what I thought I would do, I'm not going to take the full 20 minutes because unfortunately I won't be able to stay till the Q&A session, but I thought if I don't take so long now, if it's okay with the organizers, maybe I could take a few questions before I drop off. But I do know that other colleagues of mine are joining you later who can also easily field any questions related to what I will present. So what I thought I would do today is just explain very briefly what early childhood is and why it matters, just to refresh our memories on that. Then I thought I would talk about some of the challenges we face in our region, in our continent with early childhood. And then I thought to end on a really upbeat note with some of the great work that is already happening in our continent that we can build on and expand. So what is early childhood development? Let me see next screen. We normally think about it in three distinct phases. The whole period is from conception to the age of 8. So you can think about it from conception till normally when children come to the end of lower primary school. But there are three distinct phases in there that we like to pull out. The first is this period from birth to the age of 3, which includes the first 1,000 days, which is the most rapid period for brain development. I'll come back to that later. Then we have ages 3 to 6. Typically, people consider these as the ages for early childhood education, for children entering into pre-primary school. But just as with the earlier phase of birth to age 3, it's a multi-sectoral approach needed with education, protection, health, and nutrition to really support children in the preschool years. And then there's the later years for early childhood development, age 6 to 8, when we really think about those early years of primary school, when children start to master some of the basic skills like literacy, like numeracy, like working well with others. So these are the three distinct phases of early childhood, and they matter because our approaches are different dependent on the stages. And what exactly do we mean by early childhood development? I think this is important to spend a few moments on because often people think of ECD as a center, as a school, as a thing you can touch. But actually, it's broader than that. It's a general outcome we want for young children. And if we achieve early childhood development, it means that our children by the age of 8 are physically healthy. It means they are well nourished. and they can run around. When they're sick, they're well taken care of. So it's all that, they're up to date with their immunization schedule. So they're really strong and they're physically healthy. It also means children, and this is, I think, most relevant for this audience today, are emotionally secure. They feel safe, they feel protected, they feel loved, and that makes them confident for everything else they need to do. It also means children are socially competent. That means able to communicate, able to work well with their peers, able to engage with others and adults included. So they're really able to be social beings. And the last thing is that they're intellectually curious. Basically, this means really interested to learn and really keen to start that journey for lifelong learning, which actually starts even before they're born. So that's what we mean by ECD. So I hope you see what an important concept it is for all of us. And there are three different, how can I say, proofs for why the early years are the most important. We have the proof from science, we have the proof from economics, we have the proof from human development, and I'm going to go through each. So the proof from science is shown in this graph, this rather complicated looking graph. All you need to really pick up from this is that our capacity for some of the core skills we have in life, even seeing and hearing and developing our language skills, some of those skills even start to be developed before we're even born. So this means things like maternal well-being, maternal mental health, the kind of protective environment that children are carried in utero is so important for brain development. And that in actual fact, it's by the age of 3 that our capacity for some of these higher order functions like thinking critically, like being able to control our emotions, being able to read situations and communicate with others is actually developed by the time we're 3. So years before we enter a primary school. In fact, 80% of the human brain is developed by the age of 3, 90% by the age of 5. So this really is a critical stage of human development. That also means that any adversity to the brain, so any neglect, any abuse, any loss of key things like good nutrition and growing up in a healthy environment can really have lifelong impacts and in fact can disturb the growth of the brain and also rupture neural connections in the brain, some of them irreparably, making it very difficult to catch up in later life. So it really is quite a core period of time. And here I think is the best thought that we have this saying in English about a picture painting 1,000 words, and here is one. On the left-hand side, you see a brain scan of a child who's 3 years old, who has grown up in a violent-free, neglect-free environment. And next to that brain size, that brain is the brain of a child who's grown up with extreme neglect. So you see the point we're making here is the way a child is brought up, the love they have, the protection they have actually affects their brain development, their brain size, and their neural connection and pathways. So it's really, really what the job you do, the work you focus on in child protection is just so critical to the work we do with early childhood. The evidence from economics, I'm not going to read through this, it's just to give you the core point, which is a Nobel laureate, James Heckman, he won his Nobel Prize in the year 2000. And in 2006, he made this discovery that if you invest in the early years of life, you get a higher rate of return to society. So what he was arguing is invest not even just in preschool programs, but these programs for children in the first 1,000 days, and you will get a much higher rate of return for that investment you make. So we have economic evidence also on our side. And finally, is the evidence from social, from human development and the social sector. And I think many of you know this already. Children who have had the opportunity to have a great start in life tend to master the basics of literacy and numeracy well. They tend to do well in school and stay in school and don't drop out and go to higher levels of education. And they also tend to do better in the long run. Having fewer children, being able to look after those children very well, and also providing them with the nurturing environment, having more stable relationships and better health and nutrition outcomes too. So there really, again, is a really strong social argument for why we should invest in the early years. But now we come to some of our challenges. And here you have the major finding of the Lancet in 2016. The Lancet, as many of you know, is a prestigious medical journal, and they did a special series looking at early childhood. And they found that nearly 43% of children under 5 in lower middle income countries are at risk of poor developmental outcomes. And they made us think about what that means for those children as individuals, what it means for their societies, what it means for their countries. And here I've just pulled out from the Lancet the figures for sub-Saharan Africa and for the Middle East and North Africa. They were not able to separate out North Africa, but the picture is the same, that we have a large proportion of children in our continent not reaching their full potential, and that has implications for everything we all work on. Here's another challenge for us. You'll remember I showed you the Heckman curve, this curve that shows that you get the highest rate of return if you invest in young children. But we don't do that. Donors don't do that, and our governments don't do that. We tend to invest in children in the older years. And I want to be very clear, I'm not saying don't invest in primary or secondary, of course not, or higher education. But what I am saying is, if we look at where we get the biggest investments, if we look at what makes the biggest difference for equity and making sure children do well, we have to do more to invest in the early years. Another set of challenges we have is that we don't really have, how can I say, a systemic approach to early childhood. So we have a few good projects and programs that work in some areas, but they're not scaled nationally. We don't have services that are well integrated to support parents, especially, and parenting itself, and children with in adverse circumstances, in conflict, in violent homes, children who are with disabilities or families with disabilities. I mentioned already, we don't have sustainable financing to support early childhood. Often the workforce that we charge and trust with this most important of our jobs, they're not well remunerated. They often aren't very well supervised. They're even often not part of an established workforce or civil service. So this is our challenge, as well as a lack of data and good measurement for us to know how well we're doing and for us to scale up all the things that we know work. So enough on the challenges, let's come to the more positive outlooks. Here are some of the responses of what we want to do. My colleague Dr. Teshome Desta from WHO, he's going to take you through the Nurture and Care framework in more detail later. But all I wanted to do here was to flag the acceptance of the global community that we need to work together and deliver different components in order for children to be developmentally on track. And you see yourself here in the security and safety and responsive caregiving, the colors of blue. Without your sectors, without your work, it's not possible for children to be developmentally on track. We all have a role to play. And here's a second idea I want to leave with you, which is we need to take a more systemic approach. This diagram shows you all the different contact points there are within the health system, within the education system, within the social welfare system that touch on the lives of children in these critical years and their caregivers, their parents. What can we do to support and enable caregivers to give their children the best start of life? I just put a few contact points here. There'll be many others in your region too, but the point is the same. How do we create the right enabling environment, the policies, the financing, etc., to make sure all those contacts with the system are exploited to their fullest? There's many positive trends we're seeing at global level, continental level, and in countries. With a growing appreciation of the importance of investing in young years. We have SDGs speaking to our goal. We have at the AU Agenda 2063 and its aspirations clearly aligned with this importance of investing in the early years. We have other sector strategies like the Continental Education Strategy for Africa as well. And most importantly, we have many countries that have prioritized early childhood and see the link and the importance of investing in the early years for economic and social development. We see many parents themselves taking the initiative, putting their hard-earned cash to try and give their children the best start in life. And we see many partnerships, especially very active civil society at national level, at regional level, and at global level. And in fact, it's often civil society that we entrust to deliver these services for young children and their families. So if there's only 3 things you take away from my presentation, it's these. First of all, that our continent cannot meet its goals around safety and security, around economic development, unless it invests properly and meaningfully and deliberately in early childhood. The second important message is the best way for us to scale support for children is to support parenting and parents and caregivers themselves. And if we don't do that, we are really missing a trick. And we need to bear in mind, if many of you are parents or no parents, they have nothing but the best will and interest of their children at heart. So the question is, we're preaching to the converted, we've got an open door, what can we do to support them to do better? And finally, is this idea that ECD is not somebody else's business. It's not for education and preschool. It's not for these health. It's for all of us. And unless we plan together, deliver on what we're supposed to do as a sector, and hold each other to account, we can't achieve these results for children. And I end with a quote from Nelson Mandela, because I think it sums up what we all believe in, that our children are our greatest treasure. They are our future, and those who abuse them tear at the fabric of our society and weaken our nation. So thank you. Any questions, please, please feel free.
Thank you so much, Manisa, for that presentation. And you highlighted very important issues and opened up our minds really to think about what ECD actually means. You mentioned about the first 1,000 days of a child's life, how that is very important, and also spoke about investment into the early days, the early years of a child's life. And that really is very mind-provoking for a lot of us working in the area of child rights, because we have different circumstances in our different countries regarding policy around ECD, regarding investment around ECD, and prioritization of it across the board. So thank you so much for that presentation. And I know colleagues in this meeting will have quite a number of questions to ask, clarifications, and also comments as we continue to deliberate on this. But I would encourage that we just take note of our questions, take note of our comments, and then later on we are going to open up for a wide discussion. And I know, Manisa, you'll be with us to then respond to some of the questions coming up. Thank you so much. So as we go into the next presentation, I rushed in to facilitate, and you know, you're like, whose voice is that? I'm Chengetai Kanyangu, and I'm here today representing CRINSA. So I'm also going to be assisting with facilitating this session. We are looking forward to the next presentation. On our program, we're supposed to have Alicia. I don't know whether Alicia is here with us. Has she been able to join?
Yes,
so
I'm
that
here.
we can. Great.
Thank you.
So I'm going to hand over to you so that you can make your presentation as we proceed with the program. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much. My name is Alicia Lutomia. As Alia said, I'm the Program Center Administration Officer at the AfECN Childhood Network. And according to the agenda, for those who've had a chance to take a look at it, my discussion is basically just a few sentences about what the AfECN Advocacy ECD video is all about. And I know we've all had an opportunity to view the video itself. Therefore, basically, it's just an encouragement that as AfECN, basically, we are a regional network that serves as a platform for collaboration in protecting children's rights through influencing ECD policies, programs, and practices. And to start off the training, just as Jennifer had earlier mentioned, we presented the African ECD advocacy video that was launched on 5th March 2021. And in brief, the video basically describes the importance of ECD and reveals the realities across the African continent for our children, for the young children. And it also speaks to the different categories of ECD community and stakeholders whom we have represented here. And I'm just calling for us to be able to disseminate this animation locally and regionally. You can find the advocacy video on our website. Please support us to disseminate it. And thank you all for your commitment towards African children and for your vision. Thank you very much. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Alicia, for that. That video, indeed, as you say, is really something that needs to be shared widely. Just watching the video already, our minds, I'm sure, we're already beginning to see the importance really of prioritization of issues for ECD in our societies and in our countries. Thank you very much. We are now moving on. I hope that Teshome Desta from World Health Organization is with us because they are our next presenter according to the program. Is Teshome here with us?
Yes, very much.
Oh, great. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Correctly. Thank you so much. Yes, yes.
Over to you then for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I will take you very briefly on the overview of the nurturing care framework and accompanying guidelines. As the chairperson has introduced me, I'm Teshome Desta. I work for WHO Regional Office for Africa. I'm based in Harare, Zimbabwe. Thank you for this opportunity. So globally, we have a unique convergence of science and political commitment for early childhood development. The third ECD Lancet series has really brought up evidence-based interventions and the cost of implementing those interventions and how to scale up the ECD interventions and also what it takes. The Sustainable Development Goal has also put nurturing care or ECD at its core. As we can see, the global strategy for women and children adolescent health has 3 overarching objectives: survive, thrive, and transform. And ECD is very well grounded in the thrive and transform objectives. And the nurturing care framework has been launched in 2018 to guide countries on how to go about the ECD programming to support the full development of children. In terms of burden, what is really the burden of suboptimal development in our region? Based on the Lancet estimate, at least 250 million children, about 43% being in low and middle income countries, are at risk of suboptimal development due to poverty and stunting alone. If you add other risk factors, it will be much more than this. So if you see this map, 29 out of 35 countries with 60% or more of under 5 children at risk are concentrated in the African region. You can see the one shaded orange. Very few countries in Asia, otherwise most of them are within our continent. So this is very worrisome. Let me just take you very briefly. Manisa has already highlighted about the rapid phase of brain development and so on. So this is just the basics. If you see really the miracle of brain development, the genetic materials are the foundation. They really establish the broad strokes of development. The genetic or the blueprint are important to define broadly the development of a child. But what is important to remember is environment modifies this genetic blueprint during critical periods of development. So although you have the right genetic setup, but if we don't have enabling environment, these genetic materials will not be expressed in terms of realizing full developmental potential. So what are these critical periods? The critical periods are the pre-pregnancy, during pregnancy, and also the environment during infancy and childhood. So the kind of quality and timely care we provide to children will shape the development of that child in a lifelong manner that defines the health and the future potential of that child in a lifelong manner. And it can also be, the effect could be intergenerational. So the learning capacity, the health, the behavior of that child will be defined by the quality of care we provide during these critical periods. So, by the way, brain is built, not born. Although billions of neurons are formed in utero, the connections, most of the connections are made after development. We realize that synapse formation starts during pregnancy, but the rate of synapse formation in the first few months of life could be as high as 10,000 connections per second, as long as the baby gets stimulation, senses from the environment. So the environment is so much important in defining the rate of neuronal formation of neuron connections. So you can see the density of synapse formation of connections is thicker at 6 months, the first 2 years. But after 2 years, you will see less thick, which means the neurons that are stimulated or used would be reinforced, and the synapses that has less used will be considered redundant and they will be eliminated. So you can see synapse pruning after 2 years. So the first 2 years, the first 2-3 years is really the most important period. This slide shows you the window of opportunity, which is actually very short. So if you can see the first 3 years, the velocity of hearing, vision, cognitive function are at peak in the first 2 years. You see? But after 2 years, the velocity declines for all these functions. So the first 2 years is the most important for the for hearing development, vision development, emotional control, even cognitive development. So the first 3 years are the most important window of opportunity to stimulate the brain development and many parameters. I think the key message to take is the first 3 years are the most important window of opportunity to stimulate brain development. what are the risk factors preventing children to develop to their full potential? Like Manisa was saying, poverty, nutritional deficiencies, inadequate stimulation, maternal depression, family stress, violence, child maltreatment. These are important risk factors preventing children to develop to their full potential. But at the same time, we have protective measures or influences. New evidence identifies protective influences which promote child development. This includes exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months and continued breastfeeding for up to 2 years. Responsive caregiver-child interaction. This is really critical, very fundamental. Opportunities for young children to play and learn. Maternal education, these are important protective factors. As you have seen, I think in the previous slide, you can see the first 3 years is a time when you'll have the highest return of investment. 0 to 3 years has the highest return in investment in terms of human capital development compared to the rest of the phases during school, post-school, what happened. So what is really the cost of inaction? Poor early childhood development is associated with increased physical and mental ill health as an adult. About 1 year less achieved schooling, about 27% less average country annual income, and future economic loss of a country that can exceed the current GDP expenditure on health and education. So the cost of no action is really enormous and consequential. So we have an iconic study from Jamaica just to show you the effect of nutritional supplementation and psychosocial stimulation on child development. This was a randomized control trial. They divided the children into 4 groups in control. A group that received supplementation only, another group who received stimulation only, and then a third group who received both stimulation and nutritional supplementation. And these were matched with comparison group of non-stunted children. So this is the result. So they have done this study up to 24 months. And the red, the top curve is for non-stunted children. So the group of children who received both stimulation and nutritional supplementation, they were able almost to catch up with the non-stunted children. So the effect was the maximum. And children who received stimulation, the green curve, has recovered much higher. The children who received only nutritional supplementation has recovered compared to the control, but still much lower than the one who received stimulation or both stimulation and supplementation. So the conclusion from this study is stimulation and supplementation have much profound impact in terms of promoting growth development in stunted children, but the effect of stimulation is much long-lasting than nutritional supplementation. And this slide shows you the effect of responsiveness on language development. The red graph is showing you the language development of children whose mothers are very responsive compared to the blue curve of children with low responsive mothers. So responsiveness has a profound impact in language development as well as in other parameters of development. So the nurturing care framework, as I said earlier, was launched during the 71st World Health Assembly in May 2018. And this is really a roadmap that outlines why efforts must begin in the earliest years from pregnancy to age 3, And it also outlines how nurturing care protects children from the worst effects of adversity. It also defines what caregivers need in order to provide nurturing care. And it also defines the roles and the responsibilities of the various sectors that have important stake in supporting and promoting early childhood development. The guiding principles of the nurturing care framework are as follows. The child's right to survive, development, and health. Leave no child behind, family-centered care, and whole of government action. It's not only the role of Ministry of Health or Education or Social Affairs. This is a very important point to note. It requires whole of government action. It requires whole of society approach. So the nurturing care framework has a vision and 5 strategic actions. The vision is really to see every child to realize its full developmental potential. And the strategic framework has 5 strategic actions. Lead and invest. This is to do with governance, set up a national multi-sectoral coordination mechanism. Planning, it's important to plan with the stakeholders, and also financing. Establish a domestic budget line. This is very important. We are seeing countries coming up with a budget line and also establishing multi-sectoral coordination, and that is really very encouraging. The second strategic action area is focused on families and their communities. It's important to engage municipal, local leaders. It is important to have an accountability mechanism, use mass media to engage the different stakeholders. And the third strategic area is really to strengthen services. We need to integrate ECD interventions within the existing health service delivery system. We need to build the capacity of health workforce. We need to really strengthen services that are provided to children and families. The fourth strategic action area is to monitor progress. We need to integrate monitoring of children's individual development in counseling at primary care level. We need to monitor implementation and use of data to adapt interventions and their delivery. We should also invest at population level assessment and use of data to strengthen programming. The fifth strategic action area is use of data and innovation. We need to put our efforts toward scaling up interventions, implementation of interventions. We need to facilitate community of practice for joint learning, document best practices, and scale up effective interventions. Private sector engagement is extremely important. We need to use digital solutions in order to use virtual communication of delivery of approaches blended with the existing service delivery system. So these are the 5 domains of nurturing care: good health, adequate nutrition, responsive caregiving, security and safety, and opportunities for early learning. This, as Maniza said, it brings various sectors together to support the full development of a child. It's not only the role of one sector. So young children need nurturing care. They need good health, nutrition, safety, security, opportunities to learn, responsive caregiving, but we need also families with support, with enabling policies, services, and communities. So these are really the various components of nurturing care. In health, what are the interventions? Nutrition, what are really the interventions that we need to focus? In terms of security and safety, from birth registration to social care. I don't want to run out of time. Early learning, responsive caregiving, and we need enabling policies, supportive services, empowered communities. So what are really the entry points for service, for nurturing care, including responsive caregiving and early learning? You have health and nutrition, those are the interventions, education, child protection, social protection, and this could be delivered in the form of individual counseling, through demonstration and guided practice, participatory planning, and this could be also delivered through home visits, group sessions, clinical services for some, and child care centers. So I just want to draw your attention that responsive caregiving underpins all the 5 components of nurturing care. Responsive caregiving connects all the other domains. It is the basis for recognizing and responding to illness. If the mother is watching, observing, it is the basis for responsive feeding. The mother should watch the needs, the cues of the baby in order to feed based on the need of the child. It is also the basis for protecting children against injury. And it is the basis for building trust and social relationship. And it is the basis for creating or establishing bonding, security, emotional well-being, as well as learning and well-being. So responsive caregiving really is key in terms of connecting other domains. So what are some of the available guidelines and tools to support the implementation of the nurturing care framework? You can see the available tools from the Lancet series that has defined, really brought a lot of attention about advancing early childhood development from science to scale. And the nurturing care framework, and also improving early childhood development, WHO guideline was released in 2020 with key recommendations on responsive caregiving, as well as opportunities for early learning. In nurturing care operational guidance, the handbook, which is now being finalized, is a live document. I'll give you more information about it. Operationalizing nurturing care for early childhood development 2019. This is a synopsis of the nurturing care framework. And finally, we have strengthening nurturing care in health and nutrition services, a practice guide. This is again a work in progress with the leadership of UNICEF. And all these are available in the nurturing care website. And maybe just to say a few words about the nurturing care handbook. This handbook is composed of 6 guides, and each of the 5 strategic actions of the nurturing care framework has a section or a chapter, each available as a self-standing document, and one may read all or part of the handbook depending on what is needed at that time. But it is recommended to read the first part, start here, and it's a living document with regular updates supported by the nurturing care website. So in conclusion, ECD is a child right, and it is a very high return of $17 US for every dollar invested. Investing in early childhood development is a foundation for human capital development, national socio-economic growth and development. And finally, investing in children is an investment in everyone's future. Thank you very much. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Teshome, for that very informative presentation on the detail around early childhood development. And I particularly took note of the strategies that you highlighted around investment, around the importance of families and communities, and also the need to strengthen services and to monitor progress, and also very important for us CSOs to also be able to use data and be able to innovate around these issues. So thank you so much for that presentation. I'm moving on now, and I'm going to ask Stella. I already see her. How are you, Stella? She is coming in, and she's going to facilitate. Hi, how are you doing?
Good.
Good. So Stella is coming in. She's going to be facilitating an interactive session on child development. So over to you, Stella.
Thank you very much, Chair, for inviting me to make this presentation. The presentation will be very practical. And I am part of the AfECN Africa Early Childhood Network family, but I'm also supporting the Ministry of Health in Kenya with some technical work. Previously, I have trained parents from very underprivileged backgrounds, but more recently, during my free time, I also support and volunteer to facilitate parents, middle-class families who have very young children and also teenagers. So today I'm going to try to be very practical. My colleagues at UNICEF and WHO have talked a lot about responsive caregiving, and that is parenting. And for us to parent effectively, we have to know the child development principles, which they have talked about at length. Among the Nigerians, they have a saying, a proverb, that a child who is carried on the back will not know how long the journey is. For me, that is what I've seen with parents, and that is what they do to very young children. I'd like to highlight self-control. As children are growing up, they come into the world not knowing a lot. How do they learn? How do people learn? How do adults learn? But today we focus on the child. Children learn through an intricate interplay of nature and nurture. For example, brain development that my colleagues have talked about. This is nurture, and it starts from the environment in the womb. You see a child sucking their thumb, they're swimming around, they're very good swimmers when they're in utero. So the brain development is actually happening in the womb, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then there's the mind, which is nature, genes, and the wisdom of how they practice what they're learning and what they're imitating. And of course, the spiritual heritage. We are Africans, and we really value the spiritual aspect. They also learn through experiences. Again, that's nurture, and we have talked about a responsive caregiver, and it's all about a responsive caregiver giving stimulation from the environment. Then we also have nurture through schooling. And some reflections for us. Think about a newborn who starts tasting a lemon for the first time. Their taste buds burst with flavor. That was the first connection about this taste. And in the brain, from one neuron to another, connections become stronger and stronger. With time, as they continue tasting more lemons, the connections become stronger, they're constructed, and they get used to that taste. That's how I view brain development. Then I'd like to illustrate brain development, which my colleagues have talked about very well. And to say that from the time a child is born, 25% of their brain has already developed. And we can illustrate that with like a quarter of an orange. That is at birth. So brain development is already happening in the womb when the mother is stressed out, or she's going through violence, or she's happy, she's a singer, or whatever the child is experiencing, not just eating what the mother is eating, but experiencing all her emotions and learning. By the time a child is 3, 85% of their brain has developed. Yeah, what does that tell us? That a lot should happen at home. Yes, so between birth and the time the child is almost entering preschool, 65% of the brain is developed. Then at the age of 5, very little brain development is happening, yes, but by the time they're joining preschool, we see that the brain is 90% developed. From that time, between entering school and the time they probably die into adulthood, only about 10% of brain development is happening. And an example is a very young child at the age of 3 to 4 can learn up to 6 languages. You as an adult right now, try to learn a new language. You have a bit of trouble, right? Okay, and then we go to another African proverb that tells us that nobody is born wise. So this brings about the issues of a responsive parent and nurture, interplaying with, of course, nature. Another proverb from the DRC, the Hema of the DRC Congo, wisdom is like fire. People take it from others. And this illustrates our African culture. Traditionally, you didn't have to start a fire on your own from scratch. You could go to your neighbor's house and they'd give you a fiery log and you could light your own fire. I think that is what parenting is about. And we parents, because I am a parent myself, we are passers of legacies. So those are the brain connections that my colleague have talked about a lot. And we see that 80% of nutrition goes into brain development from the age of 0 to 2. And we have heard of the importance of the first 1,000 days, prevention of under 5 mortality. That's the science behind it. A lot of immunization happening, whether we would like it or not, it's very important. So exclusive breastfeeding for a very young child from the time, for about 6 months of life, and even up to the age of 2 years with complementary feeding is important for children. And why? It's to prevent stunting, and stunting is shortness for height. If you look at children of a certain age, if your child is probably shorter than others, then probably they're facing stunting. And this, if they're going through undernutrition, the effects are irreversible after the age of 2. So we have to make sure that our children are really eating well early. That's from the Harvard Center for the Developing Person. And then the implications of nutrition and good, adequate nutrition happen with lots of diarrhea or vomiting that can cause death if not adequately managed. However, we know that there are children that are irreversible, and despite all those problems you have talked about, some children actually emerge resilient, but with intervention. The other issues that can hamper brain development is issues of trauma, adversity, sexual abuse, which can result in toxic stress, and they can rewire the brain architecture. So we may do a lot to help the child develop well, but if such adversities come about, we can have issues with the brain development. Okay. Then we have another saying. I love the Africans. The Swahili people tell us that he who fears the crying child will cry himself. Yes? Yes. And then I would like to take us to a test that was done a very long time ago, 1964, the marshmallow test. And it emphasizes the issue of disciplining in the African context. So in 1964, Walter Mischel and other researchers at Stanford University conducted an interesting study. 4-year-olds were put in a room alone with a single marshmallow in front of them. And the researchers told each child that he or she could eat the marshmallow right away, or they could wait until the researcher came back after an errand. And from that, the child would get another marshmallow. Quite tempting. So some of the children were able to wait 15 minutes or 20 minutes. It took the researcher to come back to the room. They distracted themselves by singing songs, covering their eyes, playing with their hands and feet, and trying to sleep. The more impulsive children, probably sanguines and cholerics, grabbed and ate the marshmallow even before the researcher had left, and majority almost soon after the researcher left. So implications of this were dramatic. A follow-up longitudinal study when the children were 18 years old proves that early moments matter, and the kind of discipline and the training that we do early. And of course, we do this with love. So the children who waited for a second marshmallow at the age of 18 were more resilient, and they would likely be more competent adults. Therefore, self-control can be instilled early. We know that as Africans, and it has lifelong benefits, as my colleagues have earlier said. We also learned from the study that children who couldn't wait were more likely to be stubborn, indecisive, easily upset, angered, under stress, jealous, resentful, and had poorer grades in school. What does that tell us? That teachers and many educators will tell you that they work with what they're given. So the job we do as home as parents is most important. But what do many of us think, that by taking my child to school or preschool, that is where they're going to learn? No, children are learning from us as early as from the womb. Of course, we know that follow-up studies have been done on the marshmallow test up to even 2013. And they have indicated that factors like affluence, poverty will impact on a child's ability to delay gratification. But we must train our children to delay gratification because it more or less supports them to make important decisions and to learn, for the brain architecture to train them to delay gratification. How can responsive caregivers nurture their young to reach their full potential? I would say a holistic approach to stimulating children. We have talked about the nurturing care framework. It is good, it is important. But in the African context, we look at spiritual foundation that should be passed down early. And among the Muslims, among the Christians, for example, we know that. But also that we study our family trees to know the tendencies of children given certain names, and even learn a lot from the custodians of positive African traditions is very critical in informing who our children become. So we have talked about the nurturing care framework, and from my reflections are that for good health and well-being to happen, maternal health of the mother is very critical. Adequate nutrition, we've talked about it, and preventing stunting. For opportunities for early learning, they must begin from the womb, talking to the child, reading to the child while they're still in the womb. The home environment has to be safe, secure, and stimulating. And this has to happen before schooling and then continues into school. We have safety and security, child protection from adverse effects. It's very important to avoid rewiring of the brain in ways that we do not want. And lastly, responsive caregiving. A parent has to be a responsive caregiver. And how do we do that in Africa? It takes a village to raise a child. I'm sure we've all heard of that proverb. Another proverb from among the Tanzanian people: partnerships in the parenting journey help us to accomplish more. And so the proverbs is, 2 ants do not fail to pull 1 grasshopper. So we can form partnerships in our parenting journey as we form that village around our child. And I know during COVID, it's a bit difficult, depending on whether we're on lockdown or whatever is happening, but those partnerships are very important, and we have to be creative and intentional about that. I'm almost coming to the end of my presentation, and we are part of the, AfECN is running the African Union ECED cluster. And the quality working group is organizing more in-depth parenting workshop, and for example, on fatherhood in the month of May. Please post pertinent questions, comments through info@afecn.org to help us organize for the relevant speakers. So this one will be able to unpack parenting step by step for even parents and organizations or individuals that work with families and parents of young children. And then the knowledge generation working group members have sent out a call for stories, and I'm going to paste for you this particular call for submission. So in case you have childcare practices from the region that you'd like highlighted across the region, please submit them through the same email, and you can find more details on the AfECN website. And this African proverb is another very good one, about parenting as the bedrock of a nation. The ruin of a nation begins in the homes of people. Yes, our homes are very important. And that ends my presentation. Thank you very much. Back to you, Chair. Asante.
Thank you very much, Stella, for your presentation, which is very informative. And to an extent myself, I'm listening to you and reflecting on whether I was able to think about my own children in the way that, you know, you have brought it up. And apart from my work as in the CSO sector, I'm also thinking about myself as an individual. So thank you very much for that very informative presentation, and gives us a lot to think about in any work that we are doing around early childhood development. So at this point, all right, thank you, Stella. So at this point, we have had about 3 presentations. I know we are still digesting everything, reflecting on all the presentations, but we are going to have a discussion later on. We are going to have a question and answer session and you know, a broader discussion on all these issues that have been raised. I encourage that we continue to just take note of what we want to then ask or what we want to contribute to the whole discussion. Right now, I think it's fair for me to allow a 10-minute break just for you colleagues to maybe grab a cup of coffee, you know, and just maybe stretch a little bit before you come back and we continue with the rest of the program. So I'm going to allow all of us a 10-minute break. And so we come back at 10:30 for those who are in Southern Africa, and those who are in East Africa, that would be 11:30, if I'm correct. So just 10 minutes, just set your timers to 10 minutes and we are back. So enjoy your break, everyone. See you at 10:30.